Thanksgiving Day is a legal holiday in every state and possession of the United States. Today, our Thanksgiving holiday is usually a family celebration with big dinners and joyous reunions. It is also a time for serious religious thinking, church services, and prayers. The first Thanksgiving celebrations were harvest festivals, days of thanks for plentiful crops. For this reason, the holiday still takes place late in the fall after the crops have been gathered. The idea of a special day for giving thanks is an old one. The Israelites in Canaan had such a day when they gathered their grapes. The Hebrews dwelt in tents at the Feast of the Tabernacles and thanked God for the harvest. The ancient Greek feast of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, was celebrated at a festival in November. The Romans worshiped Ceres, goddess of the harvest, during their festival held in October. Our own Thanksgiving Day probably grew out of the harvest and home celebration in England. The story of our first Thanksgiving centers around a band of English settlers called Pilgrims. The Pilgrims, part of a body of Protestants called Puritans, came to America to worship as they pleased. Their ship, the Mayflower, dropped anchor off the Massachusetts coast on December 21st, 1620. The women and children remained aboard while the men went ashore to build a community house. The first winter was heartbreaking. Only about half of the original band survived. When spring came, the survivors began to clear the land. They built some well-constructed houses. They made friends with Native Americans who showed them how to plant the strange native corn. Squanto, a friendly Native American, taught them how to fertilize the soil with fish. Then followed a dry spell, which threatened to kill the corn. The Pilgrims marched to the combined church and fort to pray for rain. Their prayers were answered. Heavy rains ensured a food supply for the next winter. Governor William Bradford set aside a time for a feast to thank God for the beautiful harvest. The Native American neighbors were invited. Governor Bradford sent out men to hunt wild game for the great feast. They brought back enough waterfowl and wild turkeys to last for a week. Pilgrim fishermen brought in cod and bass. Native American hunters brought wild turkeys and venison or deer meat. The women spent many days preparing for the feast. The feast was held outdoors at big tables. The old Native American chief, Massasoit, sat at the head of the table with Governor Bradford. Priscilla Mullins and other girls went back and forth filling the platters. The custom of celebrating Thanksgiving Day spread to other New England colonies. On November 26, 1789, President Washington proclaimed a day of thanks in honor of the new United States Constitution. However, although an increasing number of states observe the Day of Thanks every year, Thanksgiving Day was not celebrated nationally until Lincoln's time. To Mrs. Sarah J. Hale, editor of Goody's Lady's Book, goes the credit for our national Thanksgiving holiday. It was she who urged President Lincoln on October 3, 1863, to proclaim the last Thursday in November as a national Thanksgiving holiday. Since then, it has become the custom for the President to issue a Thanksgiving proclamation each year. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt set the holiday a week earlier to lengthen the shopping period before Christmas. In 1941, Congress ruled that the fourth Thursday of November was to be observed as our National Thanksgiving Day. The end. Hey folks, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please help support the Filmstrip archives. Like, share, and subscribe. Cheers.